And then the last is looking at releasing our CR&R dollars that we had requested before. We are looking at, as you know, my ever favorite moisture mitigation conversation. As we own many historical sites and they're older buildings, we do have 2 of them that sit right on the Ohio River and several of them that sit near. The 4 places we're looking at doing that mitigation is at the Levi and Catherine Coffin Home, the Culbertson Mansion, New Harmony, and Vincennes. At Vincennes, we need to do a study so that we can better understand that building right now is in jeopardy because of the moisture mitigation, so we're looking to do an engineering study to be sure we can understand how to rectify that situation. And then I've also talked to you before about the log situation at Gene Stratton Porter. It is a log cabin, and some of those logs need to be replaced. And then lastly, we have some HVAC systems that need to be replaced, some painting that needs to be done, and some roof replacement. So we are covering between all 3 of these, all 12 of our locations statewide.
Any questions? All right.
Thank you all for your time.
Next, Department of Administration, Matt Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. Matt Kent, Department of Administration. I've got 2 projects before you today. The first one is the second phase of the Indiana State Library exterior renovation. This roof on this building was replaced in 2020, and once the 3 phases of this exterior project are done, the entire envelope of that building will be secure. So similar to phase 1 of the exterior renovation, this work will focus on removing and replacing the exterior seals between the limestone facade. As those seals have failed over the years, they lead to spalling and cracking of the limestone. We'll do any Dutchman repairs that need done in that as well, and then that spalling and cracking eventually leads to water infiltration in the building. So once we get this all tightened up, we'll have to do a little bit of mold remediation within the building as well. These funds particularly will focus on the west and north elevations of the building, and then that will also include scaffolding to complete the work. We will request $2.2 million in the FY 24-25 capital budget to complete this work. The work that we're doing here is very similar to what we did on the State House, just on a much smaller scale. Questions? Our next project is on behalf of the Indiana School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. We're requesting funds for several projects on their campus here, or I guess not here, in Indianapolis. The bulk of these funds will go towards renovating the natatorium, which is used by both the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. This is a 21,000 square foot building, which was built in 1999 and is in desperate need of renovation. The funds will go towards a new energy efficient HVAC system for the entire building, new roof, complete tear-off roof, lighting and pool equipment, new plumbing and electrical upgrades. We'll also be upgrading the locker rooms to make them safer for all of the participants that use the building. And then there will even be some exterior tuck pointing on the building as well. The remaining funds will go towards rehabilitation of buildings that will remain on the campus regardless of whether the co-location goes through or not. Some of that work will include upgrade to some of the dorms. We'll look at upgrading the steam plant, do some maintenance there, and then also some of the boilers, some work on those as well. Questions? Thank you.
Next, we have the Adjutant General's Office. I have Colonel Kathy Eakin.
Good morning. I'm Colonel Kathy Eakin. I'm representing General Dale Lyles as well as the Indiana National Guard today. The AGO's office requests funding to construct an additional 3,000 to 5,000 square feet to renovate the already existing 13,000 square feet of the Martinsville National Guard Readiness Center. This facility currently supports individual and collective training, administrative functions, automation and communications, and logistical requirements for the Indiana National Guard, specifically for Bravo Company 1st to 151st Infantry Battalion. The state share would be $1,520,000, and that is 40% of the total share.
Questions? All right, next.
The next one for the AGO's office, we do request that capital funding to replace the 16,000 square feet of roofing on the Washington Armory, the 20,000 square feet of roofing on the Columbus Armory, and the 15,500 square feet of roof on the Stout Field building, building number 5. The roofs collectively, or excuse me, the roofs individually are over 20 years old, respectively, and they have numerous leaks. This project would include demolition and disposal of the existing roof system. Additionally, the replacement of the deteriorated decking material and installation of a new industry standard roof system. The state share would be $571,914, and it is co-shared, cost shared with the federal side, which is almost $700,000.
Questions? All right, next.
The AGO's office also requests funding to replace a concrete retaining wall at the Michigan City Armory, which is located on the water side of the property. The 80-year-old wall is bowing outward to its open side, and as a result of this, its age and deterioration, it poses a high potential for catastrophic failure, allowing the concrete and retaining earth below to fall into the dock area and into the canal. The approximate 900 square feet concrete wall repair will include removal and disposing of the existing wall, excavation, rebuilding of the new wall, and it will be tied into the existing structure with proper drainage to assure a long life of the wall, as well as safety for soldiers and civilians as well. The cost share is 50-50%, and the state share would be $231,695.
All right, questions? Next.
Our final ask for today is the Hamilton County Readiness Center. The AGO's office requests funding to construct a 73,500 square foot National Guard Readiness Center up in the Atlanta, Indiana area. This facility will be built on an existing state-owned 55-acre plot of land, and it is located east of US Highway 31. The facility will be designed to meet the authorized administrative, training, communications, and logistical support for the headquarters of the 38th Sustainment Brigade and some of their associated units. This has a cost share to the state of 25%, and the rest is federally funded, and the cost share would be $6,791,750.
Any questions? Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to the new construction of this facility, what is currently around in that area? Development, or will be in a 55 acres by itself, or what?
So right now it's by itself, and it would be new construction completely. The Indiana National Guard does not own any property right there in that area for any construction, just that state property.
Would there be an interchange or anything built around there?
An interstate?
Interchange or it's on
I'm
31.
not sure about that. Jim?
I just happened to drive past that yesterday, and I took my own visual. Thank you for clarification.
Well, do you have any?
Yeah, committee, my name's Jim Maher. I'm the Director of State Facilities for the Adjutant General's Office. INDOT is actually putting in an exchange there at 31 and 276. There is a John Deere tractor facility that's been built there. The first 6 properties east of the property are residential, and then you hit our 56 acres that used to be farmed.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Representative Hamilton.
Yeah, I'm just curious, is this a new facility in order to replace an existing facility elsewhere?
Yes, so currently the 38th Sustainment Brigade is located in Kokomo, Indiana, and it is also spread out to a Marion Armory, which we had to vacate due to some facility concerns. And so right now the Sustainment Brigade headquarters is split out between Huntington, Indiana and Kokomo, and both armories are not modernized and they're not up to date to meet the standards of what we need.
Any other questions? Well, thank you. They put you to work today,
Thank
didn't
you.
they?
Yes, sir.
Next is DNR. Kristen Haney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to present. DNR has several projects on the agenda today. So the first one is our vault toilet replacement project. We request funding to replace 18 vault toilets at Indiana Dunes, Lieber, McCormick's Creek, Shack and Mack, and Turkey Run State Parks. The existing toilets were installed between 1954 and 1978. They've developed cracks and are leading to leaking, and it's just costly to get those pumped. So the new toilets, would have Department of Health approval, compliance with code, and ADA accessibility. Long-term DNR plans to replace all of those wooden vault toilets you might still see at some of our parks with the concrete model, just because it is more eco-friendly and it's more modernized for the facilities and our guests.
Questions? All right, next.
The next project, we're requesting funding for the installation of a splash pad to replace the existing pools and renovations to the aquatic restroom facilities at Spring Mill State Park and State Park Inn at Spring Mill. The existing pools are beyond their life cycle, while both of the pools and restroom facilities are outside of ADA compliance. The project will install a ramp access and ADA features to the aquatic area to become compliant, update to the HVAC and humidity control system, and overall just modernize the facilities for our guests of today's standards. Construction would take place while we have the Spring Mill Inn closed, which actually comes up here on November 13th. So this is a win for us just because we can go ahead and do this while the inn is getting their renovations as well.
Questions?
The next project is the Lincoln State Park Amphitheater. So DNR is requesting funding for the design work for the Lincoln Amphitheater expansion in partnership with Indiana Destination Development Corporation and IDOA. The amphitheater, it's located in Lincoln State Park of Spencer County. It opened in 1988. It was rehabbed in 2009 as part of the Lincoln Bicentennial. The expansion calls for additional parking, the loading zones, entry canopy, expanded concessions and restrooms, ADA accessibility, and we would increase the capacity by roughly 1,000 seats.
Questions?
All right, so now we are going to go into our deferred maintenance, and this is our round 3 of that funding. So the first one is the Brown County cabin renovations. So we're requesting funding to completely renovate 12 of those family cabins at Brown County State Park, one of our most popular parks. The family cabins were constructed in the early 1980s, and due to the natural surroundings of the forest that they're in, they've suffered pretty severe moisture damage. The structural supports are nearing the end of their life cycle, and replacement is needed to ensure roughly another 40 years of service to our guests. Additional renovations will include the flooring, cabinets, countertop replacements, and interior and exterior painting.
Questions?
The next one is our emergency generators for the 7 state park inns. So we're requesting funding to do installation of emergency generators. That would be emergency backup power at Spring Mill Inn, Abe Martin Lodge, Turkey Run Inn, Potawatomi Inn, Clifty Inn, Canyon, and Fort Harrison Inn. These improvements will provide uninterrupted service and compliance with today's standards while helping to prevent revenue loss. We have significant amounts of weddings and other events, not just people staying the night for weekends or for a few days at a time.
Questions?
Moving on is our parking garage at Spring Mill Inn. So this is funding to address the parking garage at the park and inn. The parking garage needs extensive caulking and expansion joint repair to prevent the water damage to the underground portion. The limestone on the garage also needs to be professionally evaluated just to ensure we have proper adhesion and to extend the overall life of that building.
Questions?
Okay, so next, also at Spring Mill Inn is our historic mill that we're very proud of. So this is requesting funding to rehabilitate the historic grist mill. The project will include renovation of the water wheel, the shaft, the inside main gears, all of the hardware components, and also the bearing plate. The scope includes removal and replacement of the windows, and then approximately 550 feet of the flume boards.
Questions?
Next is our Potawatomi Inn at Pokagon State Park. So this is requesting the funding to do a much-needed renovation. The work will conclude renovations to the pool, the restroom, entrance, and guest lobby area. The project will also refurbish the 126 guest rooms. So much like we're doing at Spring Mill, and then also we did with Abe Martin Lodge, you'll see a similar approach at Potawatomi Inn.
Questions? All right.
And then our last one is the Turkey Run HVAC replacement. So this is a request to rehabilitate the HVAC system at Turkey Run Inn. The project will include 9 commercial air handlers and installation of replacement heat and air conditioning strips. The replacement will ensure the reduction of lengthy service interruptions that can occur at the facility.
Any questions? All right,
We appreciate it.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next, Department of Corrections. Kevin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The project that we have for your consideration today is at the Putnamville Correctional Facility in Putnam County, a 2,000-bed low-medium security facility. They keep most of the population in dormitory-style housing units. The facility receives its thermal energy, its steam energy for heating, food preparation, laundry services through an underground network of subterranean tunnels. They're about 8 to 12-foot tunnels that take everything from phone and data to steam, electrical, and everything underground throughout the campus. The tunnels themselves were installed in the late 1990s. There was a corrosion problem on a section of the tunnel that's causing the metal to prematurely degrade. We've had one collapse right in the middle of the secure part of the perimeter, which is pretty detrimental to our operations. We went in, we've taken 2 years to study this, how to repair it correctly, looked at it from a number of different angles with the Department of Administration. This project will actually go in and put carbon fiber on the inside of those steel tunnels, and according to all of the engineers and all of our research, should remedy this project forever. So it will not degrade, it will not rust, it will not corrode. This is a true test of a complete fix for this facility.
We'll see.
I don't know if anything's ever forever.
Sir, they tell me carbon fiber has a long, long lifespan, so a lot more than steel.
Longer than ours.
Thank you. Any questions? All right. Next, Jeff Wedding State Psychiatric Hospital Network.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the State Budget Committee. Here today to discuss 2 appropriated projects for our hospital network. Both happen to be on the Logansport State Hospital campus. Logansport State Hospital is on 160 acres in Logansport, Indiana, and has been serving Indiana citizens with serious mental illness since 1888. The first project needed at Logansport is for windows on Building 107, which functions as the Larson Treatment Center for our patients. The existing windows, originally installed in 1992 upon construction of that building, are now starting to fail and are unfortunately out of warranty. The windows are fogging, deteriorating, and breaking throughout patient areas, including bedrooms and day rooms, which is leading to safety concerns. Furthermore, the existing window treatments, which are blinds, have become unsafe for patients and are in imminent danger, patients who are in imminent danger to themselves or others. The scope of the project involves replacement of 184 windows in that building, Building 107, with quarter-inch glass, quarter-inch bronze frames, and built-in custodial locking blinds, which is important for our psychiatric patient population. The removal and disposal of existing windows and frames is included, and new windows are to be energy efficient and will lead to cost savings with utility bills. And the Logansport State Hospital staff are prepared to begin this project as soon as possible due to long lead times. And we are seeking the release of $660,000 appropriated for this project. Any questions?
Questions? All right, next.
The second appropriated project that I am seeking today is, again, for Logansport State Hospital, and it's for them to pursue their building demolition project. This project entails the demolition and corresponding asbestos abatement for 4 buildings on their campus. These buildings include Building 4, Building 29, Building 30, and Building 40. Each of these buildings were constructed in the 1940s and are no longer utilized, nor are they viable assets for continued use by this hospital or any other state agency. Each of the 4 buildings have deteriorated beyond repair or rehabilitation and are unsafe. The buildings are currently experiencing wall collapse, ceiling collapse, failing roofs, and mold throughout. As a cost-saving measure, utilities have been shut off to these buildings, but will still need to be disconnected. This work is to include full environmental remediation, demolition of each building, as well as returning the original footprints to green space. The physical plant staff at Logansport have filed the paperwork with the Department of Natural Resources to ensure environmental compliance. And we are seeking the release of $950,000 appropriated for this project to begin the demolition.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of quick questions.
Yes,
We went on a tour of the Logansport facility maybe 2 years ago or so, and there were a number of number of buildings or wings that were not being utilized. What's going on with those? I know you mentioned these buildings, but there were some wings within the buildings. Are they, what's going on with those in regards to being utilized, and particularly those that I think were constructed back in the 90s?
Yeah, that's a great question. Those wings are now fully open. We are now a 192-bed facility at Logansport State Hospital. At that time, of course, there were issues with anti-ligature. So we were doing an anti-ligature project that the state hospital networks were working on. The State Budget Committee did hear that project in both of its phases in previous years. Work's now been completed, so we're able to open those wings back up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
Next, we have NDOT. Oh, we got a whole team here. J.D. Brooks, Steve McAvoy, and Justin Berger.
Just Steve McAvoy.
Your team
today.
left? Yeah.
Yep. Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. NDOT has one project. We're requesting an additional $950,410 over our prior $11.8 million Budget Committee approved four-phase project at our central testing facility in Indianapolis. This is a 54-year-old facility, 66,000 square feet. About 5 years ago, we started the project. It mainly is a mechanical, electrical, plumbing project. It also dealt with a lot of ADA issues. So this $950,000 is about an 8% increase over the total cost, the $11.8 million over the total cost of the project. Some of the unforeseen items, most of the unforeseen items are related to mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. Some additional fume hoods and exhausts are needed. We found quite a bit of asbestos flooring that needed to be removed in the building. So we're addressing all of these in one change order at the end of the project. We're currently in year 4 for the final phase of this 4-year project right now.
Questions? You have that look on your face.
Thank you. Thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Porter.
Chairman. Yes, please, Mr. Chairman. So you mentioned the word change order again. So, and so right now you're talking about 80% over the projected budget.
8%.
8%?
8%.
Oh, okay. I'm going to say.
Right, so-
I misheard you.
Right, the building is 66,000 square feet. So when we started the project, we broke it into 4 quadrants. We basically started from west and moved to east. So as you can imagine, when you're replacing all of the mechanical, electrical systems, plumbing systems in the building, the piping runs into one another, they overlap at the projects. So it's culminating basically in a final change order to just address all the unforeseen items that we found over the last 5 years.
So when we do these renovations, do we have a contingency fund?
We have, each phase has what we call a remediation allowance, a contingency fund, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 that we use. This again is just all of the major items that we identified over the course of 4 years we're addressing now, right? So and you can imagine, it's the central test lab. They do quality assurance testing for all NDOT's pavement projects, materials. In the course of the last 5 years, additional testing has come up that we have to do, right? So it requires additional exhaust or fume hoods in the labs. That is the majority of the work.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the university projects. First up is Indiana University and Dr. Tom Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Budget Committee. Good to be with you. On behalf of Indiana University, request release of state appropriations and project approval to move forward with R&R projects on our 5 regional campuses. So these are our campuses in Gary, South Bend, Kokomo, Richmond, and New Albany. The appropriation in the last budget session was $8.1 million. It is roughly divided amongst the 5 campuses for infrastructure R&R projects that include new roofs, restroom renovation, mechanical systems, natural gas conversions, and other infrastructure projects. Wanted to thank Senator Mishler and all the members of the General Assembly. This has been a multi-phase initiative that the General Assembly has funded over the years for our regional campuses. It has meant quite a bit to the buildings on those campuses to keep them operating, and I would contend that it likely has saved the state money over time because we've not only added 1 new building on our regional campuses in the last decade, and that building was a replacement building in Gary due to a flood. And so this commitment of R&R on the regional campuses has paid great dividends, and I say thank you. Glad to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? All right, thank you. Next, we have Purdue, Alicia Nofziger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We have 4 projects before you this morning. The first one is the Aspire apartment building purchase and associated land acquisition that I will start with. So over the summer, our Board of Trustees approved this acquisition of the Aspire property, one that may sound familiar to you all because I was in front of you this past spring in April seeking approval for a lease at the Aspire property. So specifically, the board approved the purchase of 4.8 acres of land at 1245 West State Street in West Lafayette. This is a 3-building, 4-story, 387,000 square feet housing complex from the Purdue Research Foundation. So in this instance, PRF is providing service to the university for which it was specifically designed to be nimble when it comes to real estate transactions. So last spring when I presented the lease, I noted that our current on-campus housing capacity is 13,985, and then we have an additional 1,577 leased beds as well. So currently the Aspire complex has 831 beds. These are in 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 4-bedroom configurations. So we will continue to honor the lease that we have currently, and then when that ends at the end of July of 2023, we will opt to then densify the number of beds in some of the apartments. However, the specific number of beds that are going to be added through the densification process is still being finalized and is subject to the fire marshal's approval. So just a little bit about housing demand at Purdue. We have a high demand for university housing from our students. Our undergrad students' first to second year retention rates and overall GPA are higher for our students living in on-campus housing. There is no requirement that freshmen live in on-campus housing. However, over 90% of our freshman class is living on campus. And then for these more apartment style on-campus housing and then leased beds, those we try to steer more towards our upperclassmen. So a little bit about what our long-term strategy is. Just to give you guys some stats for our enrollment in our classes. Last year's class was our largest incoming class at Purdue of 10,191 students. That put a lot of pressure on our physical capacity constraints. This fall class, as a result of some of that capacity pressure we're seeing, is slightly smaller. They have, I think it's about 9,534 in this incoming class for fall of '23. one thing that I do want to also point out in terms of what we're seeing for our application pool, which goes to speaks to our enrollment and the desire for students to come to Purdue University, is that our pool for applications has grown significantly. Over 68,000 applicants applied to Purdue for this current academic year. And if we look back, since fall of 2013, the international applications have gone up 53%, non-resident students has gone up 219%, and Hoosier applicants have gone up 35%. So this purchase is an important strategic location. It's actually adjacent to and across the street from some of our current residential and dining facilities. We are in the process, additionally, of updating still our housing and dining master plan based on this enrollment growth that we are seeing. And the updating plan will evaluate the need for new residence halls and then the demolition of select residence halls as well. So this purchase solves a near-term problem that we have for student housing. We're able to increase our capacity instead of waiting for the construction of a new facility, which would not be able to come online until about 2025. A little bit then on the cost of the acquisition. So the total cost of the acquisition is $155 million to be paid for using $125 million of non-fee replaced debt, and this will be paid for through housing, auxiliary housing and dining revenue. So, and then we're also using $25 million of existing auxiliary funds for the project as well, and $5 million of gift funds. The estimated annual debt payment is now going to be a little higher than the documentation that you guys provided due to interest rates. We initially thought it was going to be about $6 million. It is now estimated to be at about $8 million. I should point out, though, that with the purchase of the property, we will be eliminating a lease of about $5 million as well. So with regards to cost justification and comparable projects, we worked closely with experts at JLL to determine the appropriate purchase price. Because an acquisition of this type by a higher ed institution is a little bit unique, we looked at comparable investment sales from 2020 and 2021 at similar institutions for buildings of a similar construction type. We found 5 comparable sales, which had an average cost per bed of $136,000. Once we have densified the Aspire building, we could ultimately bring our cost per bed down to $127,000. So with this unique opportunity, the university did spend considerable efforts in financial modeling this purchase and justification prior to bidding on the project. And we are confident in the purchase price based on both densified and undensified scenarios. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, Alicia, I struggled with this a little bit, so I appreciate you giving me more information. Because at first I felt 155 million was pretty high.
Yeah.
And the second issue I had, I felt a lease of $5 million on a $155 million building, or is pretty good. That's only like 3.2%. So I thought, that's a pretty good deal. Why would you want to buy it? So with the numbers you gave me, it looks like by leasing it, you run about a $700,000 a year deficit.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to purchase it, you would have roughly $1 million a year surplus. Am I running the numbers right?
Yeah, I am not sure. So the room rates for the upcoming year were just approved by our Board of Trustees, and there are variable room rates anywhere from, I think, $89, $100, and this is for, I should also point out, the academic year plus summer. So you can get something from $89, $100 all the way up to about $15,000. What I do not know is how many rooms are going to be available at each price point that we're offering in the Aspire complex. So I do not know exactly what our estimated revenue is at this point.
That would be a key number, because if you're
Yes.
losing $700,000 now, if you lose more by purchasing it, is it worth the purchase? But the numbers I was given, I came up with a little bit of a surplus. So I would like to know what those numbers are when you have
Yes.
more solid numbers.
Absolutely, and I do want to reiterate, with all of the evaluating we did with this purchase, we are confident with the current amount of beds that there are, which is 831. We're confident in the purchase price for those numbers of beds as well as with the densified scenario. We understand that the densified scenario is not guaranteed, given that it is subject to approval, but I will get those numbers and share them with you.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, next.
Okay, so the next project, it is the Max and Maylene Brown Family Hall renovation. This is to renovate around 32,000 gross square feet of the Max and Maylene Brown Family Hall building. This is formerly known as the Electrical Engineering Building for those familiar with campus. The renovation includes several instructional lab support spaces, computational research labs, classrooms, offices, and an electrical shop and collaboration area. Our School of Electrical and Computer Engineering is one of the largest in the College of Engineering. It serves currently 1,900 undergrads and approximately 1,200 graduate students. Now, the first floor of this instructional space accommodates 128 students, and with the renovation, we'll be able to accommodate 207 students at once, which is a 60% increase in student capacity. With this project, we're also enhancing ADA accessibility while putting in overhead doors, which allow us to flex space, the area into larger or smaller sizes for students. The funding for this project cost is $14,573,000, with $14 million in gift funds and $573,000 coming from our operating funds.
Questions? All right, continue.
Next project, this is the Vaughter Hall of Electrical Enhancement project of $3 million. It is to enhance the electrical distribution system to Vaughter Hall, which also serves the Warren Residence Hall and Windsor Dining Court nearby. It's a 5-facility residence complex that was built between 1934 and 1951. The dining court that is part of this is used by students, faculty, staff, and visitors. So what we're doing is installing a new, larger transformer to replace 2 smaller transformers, adding another 3 transformations, and then replacing the main electrical distribution equipment. The existing transformers and distribution equipment are past their expected service lives and don't meet the needs of the building. So like I said, this is $3 million coming from auxiliary funds, housing, and dining revenue.
Questions? All right.
Okay, last one is the Northwest Chiller Plant system improvements at West Lafayette. So our current chilled water production and distribution infrastructure cannot meet the demands for chilled water during our peak cooling season. So as a result, what we've been doing is using temporary equipment, which we've rented to supplement the existing system. To rent, install, and operate that temporary equipment costs about $1.5 million, and the cost will only escalate in future years. Thus, we're replacing 3 condenser water pumps and the supporting equipment, which includes variable frequency drivers, feeders, and controls. And this is $2.25 million, all from operating fund reserves.
All right, thank you. Next, we've got the review items. We've got, first up will be the Franco Bannon expansion. We have Commissioner Chris Lowry from CHE and Seth Hinshaw, former Senate fiscal analyst.
Happy to be here. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Thanks for the opportunity to be with all of you this morning. It's nice to see folks who I've known in some instances for decades and some I've only recently met. but I really look forward to working with all of you. Again, my name is Chris Lowry, and I've had the privilege since late spring of now serving as Commissioner for Higher Education here in Indiana, and I share with you that it is a privilege for me. This is something in which I have great belief, and consider this quite a privilege to be here today and to be in this role. Joining me, as the chairman pointed out, is Seth Henshaw. Seth has become critical, I would admit to all of you, in my onboarding and in the work that we're going to present to you today. Seth is our CFO and COO at the Commission, so glad that he's able to join us. I would share very quickly with you, too, we're going to give you just a really quick, what I think of as situation assessment of where we are in higher education in Indiana, some of the challenges we're facing, and how those might help to inform the discussion around the O'Bannon grant, and also, around our report for Senate Enrolled Act 366. But I would share with you all from the start, this is my first chance to be in front of all of you formally as a policy-making body, that you have my assurance that I will always endeavor to be transparent, candid, and collaborative with you, and we hope that is what you always find, and if otherwise, call me out. So thank you for allowing us to be here, and we'll talk a little bit about, as I said, situation assessment and where we stand. I think some of you have probably seen, probably all of you, recent reports that we have issued, particularly around the college going rate in Indiana. I'll come to that in just a moment. But several years ago, about 12 years ago, our state set a goal that was actually developed by the Lumina Foundation, which you know, of course, is headquartered in Indiana, to be at a post-secondary attainment rate of 60% in order to really meet the needs of individual Hoosiers and our economy in the state of Indiana by 2025. We are currently at 48.3% in the most recent report. The challenge that we find with this is that from the time this goal was set until today, we have remained roughly 38th, 39th, 40th in our rankings among the other states. There are all kinds of reasons we could talk about why that's important, not the least of which what that means for individual Hoosiers, our employers, and our communities in the state. In digging into these challenges, one of the first things I ask of Seth and the other folks on the commission staff, and then out amongst other stakeholders, were where do we find the concentration of those challenges? Well, the one I'm going to really dig into for just a moment here in a second is the college going rate. We've had a precipitous decline. It's not unique to Indiana, but the decline has been at a steeper rate than it has been nationwide, and I want to share some of those details with you. The adult attainment rate. We still have nearly 2 million Hoosier adults without a post-secondary credential, and that, as all of you know, is critically important to the ability for those individuals and their loved ones to economically and socially thrive. Talk briefly about that. And college retention. I'm going to share a couple of numbers with you that you may already know, but I would share with you that when I learned these earlier in the summer, I was greatly surprised. So we'll share those with you too. The college going rate. Again, this little graph has been printed all over the place. I have to tell you, I was surprised that when we issued the report on June 8th that it received so much attention, but for good reason. Part and parcel to this, we have, and I say we, our commission formally has adopted some strategies we have recommended, including reorganizing our staff at the commission, looking for ways to better align to what our state's needs are from a commission standpoint. With that, we now have a dedicated associate commissioner for K-12 strategy who is literally waking up every day asking, how can we improve those attainment rates, and what are the levers we can pull? Some of you, I think, may know her, Michelle Ashcraft. She has been running Purdue Promise for the last decade and having remarkable results at Purdue University. In addition, it's not on this slide, we now have an associate commissioner for adult strategy who similarly is waking up every day and saying, how do we help those nearly 2 million Hoosier working adults achieve a post-secondary credential of value? We have been calling for, and you'll hear more forthcoming about this, the auto-enrolling of 21st century eligible scholars. A couple of things that we don't have on here, while the while the college going rate overall is 53%, the going rate for 21st century scholars is 81%. Part and parcel to that I think is really important to note, and admittedly I didn't have anything to do with this, but over the last several years the persistence and completion of those students has improved dramatically, almost to the point of equaling the average in the state. So we'll have more of that forthcoming, but one, again, to be transparent with you on what we'll be pursuing. An increase in communication and marketing around the value of education. You know, this is one that it does concern me. I think it concerns certainly more than me, folks in philanthropy and business, across government, education, the not-for-profit sectors, that too many folks just don't value as greatly as we'd like them to a post-secondary training or education opportunity. And the research tells us that's for three distinct reasons: affordability, quality, and career relevance. And we believe there are some things we can address to both improve those things and improve the perceptions of those, and you'll hear more about those. And of course, the primary reason we're in front of you today for this issue is the returning of the Frank O'Bannon Grant Award to pre-Great Recession levels. I won't dig into each of these because there are a lot of numbers. You have them. I know some of us have sat in conversation and gone over these details, but we wanted you to have these. With the college going rate, we have been breaking these apart by race, ethnicity, gender, and really trying to understand what is happening with the college going rate and why it's happening and what we might do about those issues. You can see these numbers in front of you. You know, people have asked me in the last 4 or 5 months since I've been in this role, what keeps you awake at night? These are the kind of numbers that keep me awake at night. And I think we can do something about it, though. I think you know, it's something you should expect of me and our staff and of the commission to come forward with ideas to start addressing those. The gender gap, you can see this. You know, the gap between the college going rate of females and males has continued to grow in our state. It has in other states. I believe this is the first time since the commission has recorded such information that the college going rate for males matriculating from high school to any form of post-secondary training or education is now below 50%. I think there's a whole lot that we could and will likely need to discuss as we go forward. Here we've dug into it a little bit further in combination of race, ethnicity, and gender. Again, you can see the numbers there. As I said a moment ago, our hope is simply to be transparent with all of you, to bring this type of information forward to you. The next information, these two slides, economic and social ramifications related to post-secondary attainment, are something new for our commission to report. I think it's critically important for us to realize that when we talk about post-secondary attainment, training and education beyond high school, it's not simply to feel better that someone has some credential that someone else values, but rather what the real impact is for individuals and for our communities across the state. I'd point out a couple of things to you. I think it's keenly interesting to look at the labor participation rate. That would be the second column of numbers from the left. Indiana's labor participation rate, I think we might have even heard yesterday, is roughly 63%, 63.2 or 3%. And it's pretty illuminating when we look at the differences across post-secondary attainment levels. 73% for individuals with a bachelor's degree and higher, and for those with a high school diploma, less than a high school diploma, 42%. I hear daily, and my guess is all of you do, from employers about the challenges with workforce, finding talented folks, finding folks who can get the job done. I'm absolutely convinced that there are a number of our fellow Hoosiers that with the right training, skills development, could fill those critically important roles in our society. You can see the other numbers, wage differences and so forth. this was another set of metrics that I had asked our team to look at. So what are the social impacts of post-secondary attainment? I would admit to you that in a couple of settings with large audiences, I've used a couple of these numbers to get folks' attention. The one at on the right-hand side of the column, I think, is, again, illuminating life expectancy in the United States, and it's similar here in Indiana. There's a 12-year delta between someone who has a bachelor's degree and higher and someone who has a high school diploma or less than a high school diploma. These are the numbers that keep me awake. The next slide, I think, is one of those. It's a combination of reality and optimism. I think those of you who know me would tend to say I'm a rather optimistic person, and I am. And that's part of the reason we bring the O'Bannon grant request before you and other things that we'll be bringing to you over the next several months. This is one that I think is just opportunity waiting to happen. Our institutions of higher education in Indiana are 14th best at attracting talent from out of state. Now, I've heard, and you all have heard from time to time, people say, well, we don't have mountains and we don't have beaches and things like that. We have great institutions, institutions that the marketplace has said individuals value and that have brought talent from out of state to our state. So individuals have spoken. 14th best in the nation. I was pretty pleased with that, although admittedly I did say to the staff, can't we be top 10? I feel even better about that. However, in terms of retaining that talent, we're 40th. I don't look at that pessimistically. I simply see it as an opportunity. What can we be doing? And I've had many conversations with folks in business, with our institution presidents, with folks in philanthropy, anyone who will have this conversation. What can we do? We have brought these individuals of talent to our state. What can we do to keep more of them? And I'm very optimistic that we can do that. Part of the reason that folks see value in our institutions is that we have high quality institutions, and the institutions have been doing a relatively good job at holding the line on costs. Back in June, after issuing our college going rate report, someone had asked me a question. So we hear about Purdue, and certainly have shared my remarks with President Daniels that they have done a remarkable job of holding the line on tuition and fee increases. How does that look as a state? And my answer initially was, I have no idea, so let's go find out. I was pleasantly surprised and just pleased to find out that when adjusted for inflation, our tuition increases, by the way, this was before the latest increases in inflation, so no, that did not impact this. Our tuition increases adjusted for inflation in the past 5 years have been -4%, and over the past 10 years it's been -3%. That puts us in the top 5 of states holding the line on tuition and related fees. Again, to me, that's part of the equation of value that consumers are seeing and saying, there's a good deal in Indiana. All I want to do is keep more of them here. We can use their talent in this process. As I said, joining me today, and many of you know, because frankly he worked for many of you in a past life, is Seth Henshaw. He's going to dig into the O'Bannon grant details. We're going to kind of tag team this. I have to admit, this is like that game show a bit for me. I'm going to call a friend. Frankly, if there's a question that just you stumped me with, I admit right now I'm going to call a friend if I need that. But Seth is going to go over the O'Bannon grant. And certainly the slides I shared with you, those details, again, some of us have had those discussions. I'm eager to meet with all of you, dig into any of that, any other questions you might have. We are trying to get to the root causes, look at what's been working, and reverse the trajectory on things like the college going rate. And again, thank you for opportunity to be with you this morning.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Lowry. Can everyone hear me all right? I don't want to adjust the mic back and forth. So, I'm going to give a quick summary of the Franco Bannon grant and then get into where we're at with the grant today and where it's been, and then Chris will come back and speak a little bit about what we're looking to see in the future. So as a reminder, the Franco Bannon grant is Indiana's primary need-based financial aid program. And the reason it's our primary is because it impacts the most Hoosiers, around 40,000 every year. And additionally, it is a larger appropriation than 21st Century Scholars by just enough to allow us to continue saying it's our primary need-based financial aid. The Franco Bannon grant is made up of 2 awards: the Higher Education Award, which provides for our public and proprietary institutions, and the Freedom of Choice grant. And the Freedom of Choice grant is for those nonprofit institutions. And so there are 2 parts of what we call the Franco Bannon Award today. So what we really want to highlight for you today is that the Franco Bannon grant, as it exists today, is not fully recovered from reductions that were made in response to the Great Recession. And so in the 2008-2009 academic year, so fiscal year 2009, the maximum base award was $9,160 at a private institution and $5,080 at a public institution. Awards were reduced by a little more than 30% to $6,320 and $3,505 the following year. Again, this was in response to the financial pressures caused by the Great Recession. We've been making progress towards returning the award amounts buying power over the last decade, and the nominal dollars for the private award, the maximum amount, has returned to the pre-Great Recession number. However, our publics are still nearly 10% below, and again, this is in nominal dollars. In order to adjust for the buying power that the program had in 2008 and 2009, the maximum award would need to increase to $12,500. So I'm going to go over the current schedule of awards, talk to you a little bit about what you're seeing on this screen. I know it's quite a grid. There's a lot of information in it. I'm going to very briefly walk through what you're looking at. The top column there represents what's referred to as expected family contribution. And very quickly, I want to note our Associate Commissioner for Public Policy, Josh Garrison, wishes he could be here today. He's truly the expert at the Commission on this topic and also other financial aid programs. He regretfully cannot be here because he's actually in D.C. learning about a number of changes coming down the pipeline for the FAFSA, some of which you may have heard a little bit about during this last session. And so that top column number from left to right goes from greatest need to reducing need based off of expected family contribution. The rows largely represent what is required in Indiana code. So Indiana code requires the Commission to have differing amounts for our public institutions, our private institutions, and then the proprietary institutions along with Ivy Tech. Additionally, we're required to provide different award levels for an on-time student, which is the traditional 15 credit hours per semester, 30 per year, gets you out on time, compared to a full-time, which full-time is 12 credit hours. And you'll notice there the differential is really to incentivize students to complete on time, because we have a lot of data that shows that a student that's progressing towards an on-time completion is more likely to complete overall. Additionally, what's not pictured here are the incentives that the Commission provides through Franco Bannon for things like graduating with academic honors, for maintaining sufficient academic progress while you're currently enrolled, for earning your associate's degree, and other items. So what we want to highlight here is to make very clear that the FAFSA is the application for Franco Bannon. And what we've seen a trend over the last several years is declining FAFSA rates. It's been exacerbated in recent years, likely tied to impacts of the pandemic, but frankly, as Commissioner Lauer spoke briefly about just a few moments ago, the declining college-going rate for our high school students. What the Commission has control over, however, is the application deadline. And traditionally, that deadline has been April 15th, as you can see there for fiscal year 2020. The application deadline was April 15th, 2019. And that gives the Commission a fairly good idea of what the utilization and spend will be in the following year. However, what we've seen alongside declining FAFSAs being completed is also a declining utilization by those students who are eligible for the award. So we're seeing declining FAFSAs and we're seeing declining utilization. So the Commission's recent response to that has been essentially creating a priority deadline. So the priority deadline is still April 15th. That's the cutoff. You're guaranteed to be eligible if you file by April 15th. And then what we do is continue to receive applications over the next several months and award students who are financially eligible for the program the scholarship as we're financially able to do so. We're currently expecting the fiscal year 2023 to spend around what we spent in 2022, but that was after moving that deadline by nearly 2 months to accommodate a greater capture of students. Spending history of the Franco-Bannon grant, I want to highlight very quickly for you that clearly we're on a downward trajectory. And again, I also want to point out that the last several years the Commission has been moving forward, or moving back maybe is the way to say, the priority deadline to capture more students who have applied through the FAFSA, but after that April 15th deadline. Fiscal 2018 is a bit of an anomaly year. Some of you may recall that there was a very brief period of time where the funding a student would receive from Franco-Bannon at a private institution eclipsed what a student would receive under the 21st Century Scholars. And so what we saw was a spike in the utilization of a Bannon and a dip in the utilization of 21st Century Scholars. That was reconciled, thanks to the legislature, to ensure that the student would receive the amount, whichever is greater, if they are a 21st Century Scholars student. It also helps for projecting both programs into the future.
Thank you, Seth. And now really to the heart of this recommendation. Our commission approved in one of their recent meetings an increase of 35% of the maximum O'Bannon grant base award. You'll see that reflected in the next page that we share with you. And as Seth has pointed out, this is to get back to a maximum award based on pre-Great Recession levels when adjusted for inflation, and you can see the numbers there, 12.4 and 6,200. The next slide I think is also illuminating. The focus is on low-income students. That is absolutely the case. But I think it's also worth pointing out that as you go over to the right through those columns, students who are also being affected there, and would be favorably so, are students from middle-income households. The reality is that oftentimes students from middle-income households kind of get squeezed in terms of eligibility for financial aid, and the change to this scale would capture that too.
So based on this increase, the obvious question then becomes, what will this cost? What will the increased spend look like over the next several years? So we have a bit of a wide number. We're expecting annual spend beginning in fiscal 24 to range between $107 and $190 million per year. What I'll tell you is, based on what I shared earlier about the priority deadline, the Commission has a great deal of ability to maintain fiscal controls on the program on both an annual basis and over a long-term basis. Our ability to, again, should we be trending down in utilization or to maybe trending down on the highest need students in utilization, we can move that priority deadline to accept more students who are financially eligible into the program. The current expectation is that we'll end the current fiscal year with around $105 million of carry forward between the two funds that make up the Franco-Bannon grant. And so assuming that we maintain the spending path that we're looking at, we'll be able to maintain spending levels for at least 6 years into the future. And then what I want to really hit on here is the fiscal controls that the Commission has. First of all, I've talked a great deal about this, but I can't say enough. On just an annual basis, the Commission will be monitoring utilization of the Franco-Bannon grant early in the fall, August, September, and then we have the ability to add students should we be trending below an appropriate level of spending. Additionally, if the award were ever to look like it was going to exceed our annual or our appropriation level in state support, code requires that we reduce the incentives that I mentioned earlier, which is about $10 million each year that we spend. So there's a bit of a pressure valve there. And then finally, the Commission is making this promise to the committee here today of providing annual updates on the spending trajectory, utilization of the Franco-Bannon grants as we move forward to make sure that our management of the fund is in lines with the expectations of the General Assembly to fit within the carry forward funds as well as within the annual appropriation moving forward. And the last piece I'll state here because I'll put Chris on the spot for just a moment. We will live within our means. I think many of you know me, and some of you may know Chris, but you will get to know him more in the coming years. It's been made very, very clear from Chris to myself, and then back as well, that there is an expectation that we will not exceed or require additional state support with this change, and that the commission will manage within its appropriation. One other item that I hadn't stated is that the commission is required to bring the schedule of awards to the budget committee. And so we will be, as part of that process, as I mentioned earlier, providing annual updates on the spend, on the carry forward, on the utilization, to make sure that it's having the impact, it's driving the enrollment, and it's helping to address our college going rate as is desired. Thank you, and we're happy to answer any questions.
So thank you for emphasizing the not to exceed the appropriation. I think that was my condition to put it on the agenda. So thanks for emphasizing that a couple times.
You're very welcome. We're happy to do it.
Any questions? Senator Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for your testimony. Just a few questions. You may have hit this already, but what's the completion rate for current Frank-O'Bannon grant recipients?
Senator, I do not know off the top of my head. We have data on hand for 21st Century Scholars, and I know Chris mentioned earlier that the 21st Century Scholars program largely removes student financial need from the equation of on-time completion. It essentially gets them up to the state average. It's actually nearly double their non-scholar participating cohort. I don't know off the top of my head what the on-time completion rate is for O'Bannon graduates, but we do know that financial aid receiving students are far more likely than their non-financial aid peers to stay in the state after graduating. And so we believe that there is an added benefit of providing that financial aid to the students beyond just making it more affordable for them, but also to the state as a whole on the back end by retaining that talent.
Right. That brings me to my next question around the 21st Century Scholars piece. And I do agree, and I think I've shared this story before in the Education Committee, that I did qualify as a kid for 21st Century Scholars. That was many, many moons ago. But we missed the application process. My mother worked 12-hour shifts. I never took the form home, but all my friends benefited from it, right? So I think that there would be a lot of added value for automatic enrollment for those students and those parents that may not be aware. I know guidance counselors are stretched thin, and they may not be able to promote and market that program as much. In your consideration, what is going to be that added value to the auto enrollment other than just increasing students going in?
Senator, thank you for that question. A couple of statistics. Again, our average college going rate now across the state is 53%. It is 81% for 21st Century Scholars. Their low-income peers, essentially those students who do not get into the cohort, is 30% going rate. The persistence and completion rates are almost now on par with the average population. In addition to that, we've done some very early analysis, and I would put that asterisk and emphasis on it, very early economic analysis to it. The return on investment appears to be over the working life of that cohort, so the additional, and I should back up and share that currently 48% of eligible students actually end up being 21st Century Scholars. Someone makes sure that they get signed up and so forth, as you said. But over the life of the cohort of students, the return on investment just in terms of wages, a delta between high school graduation and what the current mix is, some students associate degrees, some bachelors and so forth, is approximately tenfold over the life of those students. Increases in state and local tax receipts are essentially a wash to what the original investment is, and then of course you get other things. I held our folks back and said, don't go with multipliers and so forth, then you start to really get questionable numbers, frankly, that we can poke holes into much more easily, but those are some of the economic analyses we've done. Something else we've not done yet, and I commit to you we will do. One, you will have those those set of data from us. I want to be really confident in those when we give those to you. But on the other side of that equation too, as you saw in some of the social impact side of this, other costs go down when individuals have opportunities for educational attainment. And we will be providing that type of analysis too, Senator. That was probably a much longer question or answer to your question than perhaps you asked for.
One last one, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Well, a couple things. I would encourage looking at what other communities are doing. I know the city of Hammond has their College Bound program, right? Have we took an assessment around the state to figure out what other local initiatives that communities are doing, and could that be coupled with the 21st Century Scholars? As a lot of communities are losing population, could that be kind of a collaborative effort with local and state?
I think that's a smashing question. And yes, we've begun to do that. We haven't done it exhaustively yet. I know conversations with some of you already. We are trying to look at the challenges and the opportunities we have through what I've been referring to as a Pentagon lens. Government, education, business, philanthropy, and not-for-profits, specifically community and faith-based organizations, because there are unique and wonderful things happening around the state when those sectors of society collaborate. I'm hesitant to reference a couple of that I know. I know in one county, though, they're exceeding 80% on enrollment of students, and it's literally those sectors of their community coming together to make that happen. We haven't done the cataloging of that yet, but that's the kind of thing that Michelle Ashcraft, who I referenced, who we stole from Purdue University, those are exactly the kind of things that she's been charged to do.
That's good. Last thing, on one of the slides you had the minority male or black males were 36%.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if that's retention or what was that data?
That is the college going rate, so leaving high school to do some form of training or education beyond high school.
From a policy perspective, it may be good for you guys to formulate some type of committee or task force to figure out how to address some of those barriers. I talked to some of these institutions, even in our region, and they're seeing those numbers decline as well. So as a state, I think that might be something that we want to explore, pulling together some stakeholders and subject matter experts to figure out how to remove some of those barriers and address some of those concerns.
Senator, I couldn't agree more, and my first meeting this morning was on a Teams meeting call with some other folks in Indiana and looking at some best practices in other states, including one that I was made aware of recently where the Atlanta Federal Reserve has done some remarkable work in looking at the benefits cliff, identifying 7 different benefits, how that impacts students' abilities to matriculate, persist, and then complete. Thank you.
Representative Porter.
Thank you very much. Mr. Commissioner, a couple of things, and we'll follow up on Senator Milton. I know the numbers are for 21st century are okay or better, but there are a lot of people who are not in 21st Century Scholars programs that can be. What are we going to do to? I know you talked about it, but we really had to make a full court press in regards to reaching those individuals. And that's a comment. Number 2 is that you did say just now you were on a call because it is hemorrhaging, across this nation. And what are the best practices with other states? And lastly, would you consider working with groups, nonprofit groups like the NAACP, other groups like that, Hispanic Caucus, in regards to generating statewide programs, 501c3s, to help generate and help get the word out? Because even though this has been going on for a while, there are still parents that are not aware of the 21st Century Scholars, and there's students that even if they don't totally participate, they need to sign up, because some people just take them 3 or 4 times to hear about a program, and sometimes that third or fourth time they are juniors or seniors, but have the ability to move forward, but the opportunity gap is there versus that will not address their achievement gap that we need to address.
again, I couldn't agree more, the opportunity gap, and I'm going to steal that going forward. So thank you there. You addressed 3 questions essentially to me. It will absolutely be a full court press to reverse this trend of the decline to 53% with specificity, which is why we've called this out by race, ethnicity, and gender. You asked about best practices around both the state and nation, and we're pursuing those. I've been trying to spend a lot of time reaching out to other states who have found ways to reach more students. You know, what does that look like? What's the applicability to Indiana? And with regard to organizations around the state that are doing, I think, a remarkable job. I've had several meetings with, in our offices, in their offices, with members of their boards, of the Indiana Latino Institute, the Latino Council, the Urban League, Indiana Black Expo. I'll leave organizations off. If I start listing too many, I'll just give you an example. But again, this Pentagon to which I referred, and our staff is probably sick of hearing me say it, but I think it provides a lens for us to think about these challenges, and specifically one of those 5 is around nonprofits and community and faith-based organizations. We absolutely have to have everyone on board in reaching students, whether it's to matriculate to training and educational opportunities, or whether it's to persist. We should have a conversation offline on this too. I think there was a great deal of learning during the pandemic, and specifically with the state's rapid recovery efforts. 2 quick examples. In Indianapolis, a couple of partnerships that were pretty remarkable that were formed were between where I used to work, Ivy Tech Community College, New Corinthian Baptist Church, and One America and Shepherd Community, as an example, to reach students more effectively, help them, whether it's removing barriers to persist and so forth, but then also creating the pipeline to employment. By the way, we called it Bridges of Hope, starting with where someone might find themselves in place of need. I used to be on the Gleaners Food Bank Board and was amazed that in a matter of a month, the need for those who were hungry in Indiana tripled at the beginning of the pandemic. So we looked at that and said, how can we better reach individuals? That was a clear way, and we did that. But beginning with where an individual might receive support in the community, looking at education as the opportunity on that bridge, and then, of course, employment on the other side of it, which is, I think, what everyone ultimately seeks. You have our commitment.
Other questions? All right, thank you. Do you want to start your other presentation?
Yes, thank you. Perfect. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We'll roll right into our outcomes-based funding report, which I very much enjoy calling the 366 report. We will see how long that lasts. But first, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to come before you today. I'm going to quickly outline why we're here, what we're going to talk about, why it matters, and what we're doing about it. Or as Chris affectionately refers to it as the what, so what, and now what. So Senate Enrolled Act 366 was passed by the legislative body in 2022, which did a number of things, one of which was codifying the requirement that the Commission for Higher Education create an outcomes-based funding formula, made modifications to the items in which our strategic plan must include, and I believe specifically affordability and economic development, I think also were included, requires a report detailing the formula, methodologies, and metrics used to create the formula, as well as brings us before this body today, before the budget hearings to take place in the next couple of months, to go over those, and most importantly, to receive feedback from this body, from other members of the legislature as we move forward. Prior to Senate Enrolled Act 366, a number of items occurred, and essentially I want to highlight them for you because I feel like a lot of it guided us in our review of the legacy model and moving forward. So the Senate passed version of the 2021 budget bill included language that established a task force to study the way in which higher education operating funding was allocated. The topic was not included in the final version of the budget bill, but was included as a study committee topic for fiscal policy, which was assigned to a working group chaired by Senator Eric Bassler, and a number of the members of this committee were also included in that working group and the summer committee at large. The working group met twice, heard from multiple national experts, from the commission, from each of our institutions, And the final report included 7 proposals, many of which ended up being included in Senate Rule Act 366, as well as this presentation and topic. And so ultimately the working group asked the commission to consider a number of things. 3 to be precise, mission differentiation being key among them, and specifically consider metrics which are categorically differentiated between our 2-year institutions, our non-research institutions, and our research institutions, as well as utilizing more recent data. As many of you will recall, our legacy formula uses 2 3-year averages. One of the metrics for a long time has been on-time completion. So for our 4-year institutions, it means you add another 4 years, and you end up with a 10-year data set that is about 2 years behind by the time 2 to 3 years behind by the time we implement and fund it. And then finally, allowing our educational institutions to be measured against themselves so that we're an educational institution to show improvement in key metrics, that improvement would not be overshadowed or outweighed by another institution's greater improvement, but instead allowing improvement to be measured against the institution's base itself. In addition to the working group, in 2021, the Commission for Higher Education requested a third-party review of our legacy formula, which was conducted by HCM strategists. HCM included 5 recommendations. 3 of these should look very familiar to you, those being enhanced mission differentiation, the range of data being used, and then reflecting differences in institutional outcomes across the continuum. They also included looking into further the role of short-term credentials and certificates on the impact of the funding formula, and continuing to consider and review any impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that brings us to the opportunities provided by this review, by the need for this review, and the review that was asked and called for by this body.
It occurred to me as Seth was just sharing that with you. Seth, I hadn't thought about this until that moment, but prior to coming into this new role, I met with Seth and the other senior staff essentially to say, what should I really be paying attention to? I committed certain things to commission members and the governor and others, but what other things? And it was 2 or 3 weeks before I came on board, and one of those was 366. And I think it was Seth who said, we've really got to understand what's there, and we'll be back in the fall with the budget committee and making this report. Seth, I just realized, in having said, yes, let's make this a key priority, it was about 10 a.m. on my first day on the job that he and I met with Senator Bassler down in his district, and this was among those topics. So this has literally been front and center, I know, since I began my brief tenure. You just saw this information. I won't belabor it, but here are key reasons why we also think what was issued from Senate Rule Act 366 and the task force are critically important. Decline the going rate, the adult population without post-secondary credentials, and the graduate retention. Again, you know those numbers. We're going to keep repeating those. Our poor commission members, you know, they've heard this ad nauseum from me and our team, but we're just trying to lift this up because it is important, but more importantly, or just as importantly, the opportunities to do something about it exist here in Indiana. What we're referring to as a prospective model, I started to allude to this. I know the work began before I arrived, but you know, in the spring timeframe, there was a review of the legacy model. Over the summer, you know, work to begin the development of what we think of as a prospective model. I think Seth will talk a little bit more about that, rather than it being retrospective and looking backwards over multiple years of performance, looking forward and saying, what are the key things on which we hope to see focus? By now, it's probably clear to you, college going rate, among other things. Continuing on the completion side of it, college going rate, adults, and graduate retention. And as you can see, our commission members voted to approve this form of model, a hybrid model, if you will. Seth will talk about that again, moving from legacy to a prospective model as we come into our report to you, and then, of course, the upcoming legislative session. Be gathering with all of you more formally as we go out through the fall and into the winter, and, of course, budget hearings coming up in December. Seth, I'm having problems there.
Well,
There we go. I think it's your turn.
I'm up.
There you go.
My problem. Thank you, Chris. So I want to outline for you at a high level what this perspective model means, what it looks like, and how it would operate. There's a number of graphs we'll get into at the end of the presentation, which I hope will make sense of the words on this slide. But any and all questions, we greatly look forward to answering and working with you on. So key, first and foremost, as Chris mentioned at the August commission meeting, the commission members agreed and voted to move forward in the 23 biennium with a hybrid model, and hybrid meaning part one of that model will include the legacy model, which you are all familiar with. Part two will include this perspective funding model. So the perspective funding model will be a new non-reverting line item appropriation. And we think that is very key because it meets one of the requirements or one of the items that we think is very important, which allows institutions to be compared against themselves over a greater period of time. So each institution will be eligible for a proportionate share of this new line item. That proportion will be based off their 2023 operating appropriation. So if an institution received 10% of the total operating appropriations, they would be eligible for 10% of this prospective funding. Any funds not earned over the biennium would be reallocated in the next biennium, and that would be a proportionate reallocation. And again, I have a brief example of what this would look like in just a moment. But the idea here would be that an institution that does not fully earn its allocation in the biennium, whatever was not earned would be reallocated the following biennium based on the new proportions of operating appropriations. Progress will be tracked during the annual data collection progress that the Commission has held for many, many years. You'll note here that it talks about when the results will be available. Commissioner Lowry's made it very clear to staff that we would like to see that timeline moved up. That will require great partnership, continued partnership with our institutions, as this is their data which they provide to us for these purposes. We have a great research team on our staff that works to review that information, collect that information, clean that information using a variety of other sources as well. Again, institutions will earn funds as they progress towards their goal. The idea is not that it is a all or nothing approach, but the idea is that as they make substantial progress towards those goals, that they would earn funds, with the idea that there being a balloon payment at the end when they reach the final goal to make sure that we don't stop at 90%, but that we make that last bit of effort to get to 100% or 110% of the goal. And then finally, money earned during the biennium would be added to the institution's base in the following biennium. This is very similar to what occurs today. An institution that earns money under the legacy model, that is added to their base, which then goes into the next biennium and moving forward.
So what you see before you is really just to illustrate from a graphic standpoint what Seth and I both have talked about a bit, really categorized into two primary sections in terms of columns, if you will, system goals, and you'll see that the focus remains on quality, career relevance, completions, again, part of that coming from state and national data where we know the consumer, that students are keenly interested in understanding career relevance and quality, but also in completion. If there is something very specific to which we could point that the funding formula has really made a difference over the years, it is completions, and it's across the board. We've also, in doing this, have tried to take note of what the businesses that are either already in Indiana or that the state is trying to acquire, so sort of organic and acquisitive growth, if you will, for our state and as places of employment for our fellow Hoosiers, often note in conversations with us, with IEDC and so forth, and that is, what does the system look like in Indiana? And so in those first two columns, system goals around quality, career relevance, and completions, and what do those institutions collectively have to offer, but then also drilling into it. I've been involved now very much on the front end with IEDC and others. What does that look like by institution? So what does the institution bring to the table? Stepping to the side for just a second, one of the things that our team and I have been emphasizing and have really formed a great partnership in doing so is with IEDC over the last several months. I would share with you that in my former days, I know some of you from my life, formerly at Hillenbrand, publicly traded Hillenbrand, I did some of this work, and then of course at the college, that it has been imperative in my view for our state institutions to be involved much sooner in the economic development work of our state. So again, whether that's organic growth of an enterprise or acquisitive growth. And to that end, what we almost always see is an organization, an enterprise that's wanting to invest or grow their investment in Indiana, wants to know what the system looks like and how that can support them in the long term, but then also distinct assets among our institutions. So you'll see that. System goals, but then also institutional goals. Not a surprise to you by now on that. I guess that would be the third line here related to the college going rate, the adult population, the adult student, and graduate retention. Oh, thank you. I think this really just reiterates the last slide, so I will not belabor that. I think this is yours.
Thank you, Commissioner. So earlier, as I mentioned, the idea of the model would include the carry forward of unallocated, unearned funds into the next biennium. And so what I'm going to try and go through here is a visual that represents what that would look like. So these are all fictitious numbers, but what you're looking at here is supposed to represent statewide funding for higher ed operating. So if you began with $100 in fiscal 23, that would be the base appropriation for those institutions in the next biennia. The General Assembly would then appropriate a new line item, which would be, like I said earlier, proportionately allocated, and I'll get more into that in the next slide, amongst the institutions. So every institution would have an amount they were eligible to earn. So assuming we earned 2 of the 10 million in the first year, total payments would be 102 million in the first year. 5 million in the second year, total payments would be 105 million in the second year. Well, you'll note in that far right column, that orange 3, that represents the amount that was unearned of the allocation. And so moving into the next biennia, the idea would be that institution total spending was, or total earned in the previous biennium was that 7 of 10. So that 7 would be added to the base. So now institutions would earn 100 plus the 7 earned the last biennium, and that would be their new base appropriation. And then, again, assuming the same amount of new state support, represented there by the green 10, you would add the amount that was unearned in the previous biennia for the total amount to be eligible for awarding in the new biennium of the 13. And you keep going on and so forth. The amounts would change over time, but the amount earned is paid out in the biennia that it's earned and then added to the base in the following biennia. And then finally, what we're trying to show here is essentially how that reallocation, this prospective idea of reallocation would look moving forward. And so what you see here are 3 fictitious universities, each of which with their base appropriation, and you'll notice the proportion of the total appropriation is different for each. And so assuming again, here the light blue column, assuming $100 in this model is eligible for being earned in the prospective model, each institution would have the ability to earn their proportionate share of that $100 based on the percentage. And then depending on the amount that is earned, whatever is unearned, again, in this model, so $50 unearned, but you'll note there that university number 3 earned all of the funds that they were eligible to earn. So what ends up happening is in the following biennia, when those unearned dollars are reallocated, the proportion of funds eligible for that institution that earned all of their funds grows. And so this would be a prospective form of reallocation. It would ensure that no base appropriations would necessarily be reduced under this model, but it would also ensure that institutions that are performing well, that are meeting the expectations or exceeding the expectations, have the opportunity to see a larger growth in the future total appropriations. So next step, so we're here today to receive input and feedback from members of the committee. We've been working with our institutional partners, with commission members, and receiving their feedback and making adjustments over the summer and early fall. The next major step is really to finalize for each category the goals by research, comprehensive, and 2-year. We believe there was a great deal of wisdom in that recommendation from the working group to ensure similarities between those institutions, the populations they serve, and then also the role they play in meeting the outcomes that the state needs with our adults, with our high school, college-going students, and then addressing retention of our graduates. And then once we do that, we'll be working with each institution to finalize a stretch target for each of those goals. So for an example, the legacy model, apologies. Thank you very much. So the legacy model today essentially rewards growth generally in the same 5 metrics for every institution and every institution type. What this model gives us the flexibility to do is to instead identify growth targets for similar institutions, but allow those targets to be specific to that institution. So instead of saying that every institution must reach 65% on-time completion, we would work with every institution to identify a stretch goal for that particular institution. And maybe instead of overall completion, we focus on adult completion or adult on-time completion. We also this enables us to work, I think, especially with the regional campuses based on being at P&W today, to look at, does it make sense to improve not only our on-time completion, but also offer the opportunity for institutions to improve their extended completion time or 1.5 times completion rate. As we know that there are a large number of students who upon enrollment do not intend to complete on time, and their lack of completing on time is not always or necessarily a result of the institution not providing the supports or the academic opportunities to that student. It could very well be that that was the student's intention, they're working part-time, or any other of ideas and opportunities. That isn't to say that we're moving away from the need for on-time completion, because we still have a great deal of research that shows students tracking towards and persisting towards on-time completion are the most likely to ultimately complete. And then it should be lost to no one that the sooner you complete, the lower your overall cost as well. And so we don't want to incentivize institutions to move away from on-time completion, but we do want to make sure that we're also not incentivizing institutions to push students to take more coursework than that student should take, or that meets with their expectations when they initially enrolled into the program.
Seth, thank you, and I'll just wrap up this portion. I'll circle back to where we started our discussion, and that includes my commitment to all of you to be transparent, candid, and collaborative. I think that's critically important as we think about where we are moving with performance funding. Senate Enrolled Act 366, the work of the task force, and frankly, my own viewpoint is we have got to be working collaboratively with members of the legislature in this area. I know Seth and I and others have spent a lot of time with our university partners, the presidents, the government representatives, but also, again, folks in that Pentagon that I was referring to, having met with some of you. You have our 100% commitment to that. And frankly, I don't know how else to do it. We've got to work together on this, and you have our commitment to this, and we're glad to take any questions you might have. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members.
FSSA, Allison Taylor.
Good afternoon. Allison Taylor, Director of the Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning with FSSA. Do I sound okay? Okay. I have 4 items for review today, and Chairman Mishler, would you like me to just jump right in? We are passing around, it's a handout relating to our 4th item that just provides a little bit of historical context, so you don't necessarily have to look at it this moment. It is the 4th item on the review. But to start, we are presenting the former foster youth state plan amendment. This is really a cleanup state plan amendment. The Federal Support Act requires that former foster youth receive Medicaid through the age of 26. And we had a glitch in our eligibility policies that if an individual had Medicaid out of state and came to Indiana after turning 18, they would not receive Medicaid for those extra few years. And so we are amending our state plan amendment and our policies to match that federal requirement. So there's some parity for individuals who are former foster youth, no matter where they were when they were on Medicaid in their earlier years. Okay. So the next item that I have is another amendment to our state plan amendment. This one is as a result of Senate Enrolled Act 2, we will be reimbursing for long-acting reversible contraception for federally qualified health centers and rural health centers outside of their prospective payment rate. And so just as a reminder, those two classes of providers are paid differently. They get a PPS rate, they get a bundled payment. Because LARC is so expensive, and so we partnered with the legislature to carve those out. So FQHCs and RHCs will now be reimbursed separately outside of the PPS effective November 1st. Okay. The third item is an amendment to our state plan amendment relating to group homes. And so this one is actually, so it's an amendment to prevent an unintended rate reduction. And I can explain that just a little bit. And these providers are paid on a cost-based system based on a historical median. And it just so happens that the 10% rate increase that I believe in partnership with the legislature July 1st, 2022 came around. The way our state plan is written in our methodology, we wouldn't account for that 10% increase. And so we want to make sure we aren't unintentionally causing a rate reduction. That's what will result if we did not pass the state plan amendment. I think this is consistent with legislative intent that we did not want to see a reduction there. So we're just updating our calculations in state plan to match legislative intent. All right, and our final item is actually on the waiver side of the house, and this is a really unique emergency waiver relating to the Healthy Indiana Plan, or HIP. This is one of our largest programs, currently have over 800,000 individuals in HIP. And this particular emergency amendment from the federal government allows us to pay HIP at Medicare rates through the end of 2023. And this is coming up, and this is an issue because in 2020, the federal government passed a law, a regulation that would prohibit states from paying at different levels across programs. And as you know, HIP, kind of a hallmark of HIP has been that we pay at Medicare rates. The rest of the Medicaid programs have a different fee schedule. They've said you need to equalize. But this amendment in particular, you'll note there's no fiscal because this is just the amendment, the vehicle, the mechanism to allow us to continue to pay status quo at Medicare rates through the end of 2023. So in terms of next steps, and that's some of the handout I provided, it's background context. You can spend time on it now or later. That information is also posted on our public website, and we've also had public hearings on this issue. We will be going through, we are in the process of active provider engagement and discussions, and we will be coming back to you with what the plan for the next phase is. We just don't have that yet. That's in active development. So for now, this is just the amendment to maintain status quo, to pay at HIP, to pay at Medicare rates, and then we'll work with stakeholders, work with the legislature, and be back with what that the future looks like. Okay, thank you.
All right, is there any motions to remove any of the items from the agenda? Is there a motion for the agenda? So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. So we have one thing left. Our good friend, Mr. Chris Johnston, with an update on the federal funding.
One thing left. Okay. Good. Good afternoon, and a pleasure to be here in Northwest Indiana and here for the periodic update on the federal funds legislation, the significant programs that have been adopted over the last several years. And we'll go through the items similar to what we have in the past. And as I mentioned, I think at the last meeting, we're at different stages of these programs. And we're going to touch on the Coronavirus Relief Fund from the CARES Act. We'll talk about the State Fiscal Recovery Fund from the American Rescue Plan. And then finally, the Infrastructure Act. As you'll see on slide 3, we are closing the Coronavirus Relief Fund. It's a long milestone incoming here. So we did finish, and we moved the rest of the remaining funds into the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund at the end of September. And so that closes out all the different programming, and we'll do a final closeout report with the federal government at the end of December. On slide 4, it's sort of a summary of the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and what you'll see there is my limitation on graphic arts. So what I have to say is on the right-hand side, those buckets should actually be in reverse order. So what is down at it should be 32, 33, 15, and 20. So I will send out a revised chart of this and then correct it before we post it as we usually do, to the SBA website. But really the public health response, and if you'll remember, that was standing up contact tracing, testing, all of those things, PPE. That should be 32% of the $2.4 billion went to that. And then 33% went to the economic and business relief, 15% to local government, community, and individual assistance, and then finally, direct expense recovery at 20%. Slide 5 is a slide that you've seen before, but it's a summary, a condensed summary of the appropriations from the 21 budget for the American Rescue Plan. As we've mentioned before, we have those an amount of unallocated funds of $190 million. But the thing that we'll touch on here in the next couple of slides is, so the ARP, as a reminder, those funds have to be, with the federal government, have to be obligated by the end of 2024, and they have to be spent by 2026. So we're really in the deployment stage and engagement stage in various forms. The next one slide on slide 6, the broadband, is one example. So that was a $250 million appropriation, of which the funding source are 2 different buckets in the ARP, the State and Fiscal Recovery Fund of $47 million, and then there's the Capital Projects Fund of $203 million. There's about $70 million that's left, still having the source being $47 million from the State Fiscal Recovery Fund and the $22 million coming from the Capital Projects Fund. At the last meeting, we presented that the last round of broadband grants was approximately $181 million. That came directly out of the Capital Projects Fund of the 203, so that leaves the approximately $22 million from the Capital Projects Fund. Broadband is really at a transition point right now because we still have this money to deploy, but already the broadband office is working on the infrastructure bill. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit on different federal programs. You may have heard BEAD or digital equity. So there's 2 or 3 major components of the broadband program that will be transitioning to the infrastructure bill. So in the meantime, the broadband office will work to deploy this final chunk of $70 million, but we'll be working towards the next chunk of money, which we don't know exactly how much that's going to be, because the FCC is trying to improve the maps of where there's underserved and unserved areas around the country. And that's quite a cumbersome project, undertaking by them. But one of the things also is, up to this point in time, we've really focused with the best mapping we could on the underserved and unserved areas in Indiana. But with a lot of the challenge processes, the industry has really had a lot of input on this. The CPF and the BEAD, Broadband Equity and Deployment, I think is what it stands for. This next phase is really, they want community input. So they want the states to go out and actually engage with the communities to hear where they believe service isn't up to what their expectations are. And so the next 9 months, we've put our application in for the BEAD and the digital equity planning. In the next 9 months will be a planning phase. We'll deploy the remainder of the CPF. We'll do the planning for the next 9 months, and then that gets presented, and then that coupled with the mapping from the FCC will indicate how much money actually comes from the infrastructure bill. So we don't have a targeted amount yet, but it's still going to be a significant sum of money. Couple of notes on the programs we've talked about before on slide 7. So the appropriation, I think it was $1.1 billion for road and bridge projects. About half of it has been obligated. The remaining half will be obligated in the next coming letting seasons. And so those projects have been identified, they just haven't been let yet. So that's why only half of it's been formally obligated. There's over 60 water, sewer, stormwater, and drainage projects. $160 million is that appropriation. All of those funds have been awarded. $116 million has been obligated. That's actually those projects that are under contract or under formal grant agreements right now. DNR, excuse me, DNR had a grant program on the conservation. That was $25 million. And awarded 27 projects involving 3,700 acres and about $23 million, which were matched locally with additional $9 million. The READY program, excuse me, has about 139 funding requests. They have a lot of hundreds of projects within the within the 17 regions. $200 million of that has been submitted, and they anticipate the remainder of the $500 million appropriation being submitted by the end of the year or shortly after the first of the year. Slide 8. Excuse me. Slide 8. Wanted to update. I think last month we talked about the Community Catalyst Program from the FSSA. At that time, it was about $27 million. They've now programmed 90 of the $100 million. They're reserving $10 million just to see what of the 11 program areas might need additional funding based on how things go over the next several months. And so their goals are sustainable structures. You may have seen the release on the crisis response helpline, the 988 number. So $10 million of this was used to stand up that call center and then integrate with other call centers around this country. Thank you. Thank you very much. And then also focusing on quality access. They have some grant programs for shelter services and transportation services to connect those in need with those that can provide those services. And then just like everywhere else, we're hearing workforce, focusing on that. And there's some psychiatric residencies that they're funding, as well as just other training opportunities. The remainder of the slides deal with the status on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the infrastructure bill. As we mentioned, there's about 5 different program areas: transportation, environment, broadband, cybersecurity, and energy. Most of the money is coming out in formula grants, but the other competitive grants, many of them are still under development with the federal government. Slide 10 identifies some of these competitive grants. We had mentioned NICD. They were before you last month about their transit-oriented development districts. We did mention that they applied for that competitively in July. The update there is that they expect to hear the award results in the next couple of months or by the end of the year. INDOT has made several applications in the Bridge Investment Program, Rural Surface Transportation, and then the Reconnecting Communities grants. And DNR is still evaluating a not insubstantial or small, but there are a handful of projects. They're still waiting for the various federal awarding agencies to release those details. On slide 11, I touched again on this one last month, but this continues to involve a lot of planning between Homeland Security and the Indiana Office of Technology and local governments. I forget which month it was, but it was sometime in the last year. IoT came and asked for $8 million out of the capital reserve to be released to start the planning on this, and they've been doing that for the last year. And so you can see their activities there as far as the number of counties, number of officials that they've met with. Then they're also teaming up with Purdue and IU to actually do an assessment of the cybersecurity status with local governments. The details of this application have been released, and the applications are due by November 15th. The awards are expected also by the end of the calendar year. It's a formula grant. It'll be $20 million over 4 years, roughly $4 to $5 million a year. And 80% of it must go to locals. And so that is why the outreach, IoT already started with the outreach with local units of government. Part of this is to develop a planning committee and charter development, and all of those things have to be submitted into the federal government as part of your application. Other formula grants that are being pursued on slide 12 is the Office of Energy Development. Dealing with the electric grid resiliency, that has been moved back to March of 2023. And then the State Energy Program, that application is due in December. Let me take a step back, give you some numbers here. Electric grid resiliency will be $23 million over 5 years. There is a matching component with that, and that matching can come from not only state funds, local funds, but then also the industry. The utilities themselves could provide those matching grants. There's an opportunity still under development for a revolving loan fund. This exact amount isn't known at this time. The weatherization program got an additional sum of money. It's estimated to be $90 million in the upcoming federal fiscal year. And the Housing and Community Development Authority put recently its application in for that. Then in the transportation space on formula grants on slide 13, you may have read that the state of Indiana's electric vehicle infrastructure plan, charging plan, was approved. And that was on September 27th by the Federal Highway Administration. It's about $100 million over 5 years, and you can see the map where the proposed station locations would be along various corridors in Indiana. And then finally on slide 14 is just some formula grants that, again, Indiana Department of Transportation is working on. So bridge investments, carbon reduction, and then PROTECT, which is an acronym for just more money to actually build the resiliency of our transportation network. Questions?
Questions for Chris? We're worn out.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's all we have. So, one thing I'll bring up is our next meeting or meetings will be in December. So we'll start budget hearings on December 8th, 7th, and 8th. And then we'll have them the following week, the 14th and 15th. So those will be our budget hearings. So the next meeting then would be December 7th. And it'll be in room 431 at the State House. So any questions or anything from the committee? All right, safe travels. We'll go ahead and adjourn.